to introduce the people on the panel. Start from Georgina. Georgina Adam is an author, journalist, and analyst, art market analyst as well. She's contributor in FT and
the art newspaper.
And also art newspaper. Her books, Dark Side of the Moon, and the last one I think it just published.
Just published, yes. About
Rise
private
and
museum.
Rise of the
Private
museum.
art museum,
Yeah.
yes.
And obviously Douglas Abdell, our dear artist and friend. He's Lebanese, American, Italian artist who was under the shadow for many years, and thankfully we are having him here in London for the first time. And Morad Montazami, art historian, curator, writer. He's director of Zamân Books and Curating. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much for coming. We're obviously very honored to have here our artist and the curator of this exhibition. So I'm going to start by asking Douglas a few more personal questions now. If you've seen the film, you know some of it. And then we'll move on to Morad to explain how he curated the exhibition. But first, so Douglas, you mentioned your mother. The reason that you became a sculptor, that you were always interested in sculpture, was that your mother gave you clay to play with.
Exactly. She gave, I had two older brothers, and she gave them canvas and paint, and she gave me clay. And it was actually, I say 5 years old in the film, but it was really probably 3 or 4 years
So
old.
you were very young.
I never stopped making sculptures. It wasn't exactly, it was like a hobby
Yes.
in the early age, but I always made sculptures.
But it became more than a hobby.
yes,
it became your life.
No, it became my direction in life.
Yes.
Because I felt I had some kind of a profound, now in the oldie parts of my life, I started to analyze my life. And I think I needed to make something that was real in the world, that occupied space. This is a kind of a psychoanalysis that I'm doing now.
And your brother does.
Yeah, my brother is a psychiatrist, psychologist, and he used to say to me that I was a happy child. My father died when I was 6 years old, but it wasn't that I was in a stressful, sad situation. I always had a tremendous amount of energy, and I like to make things. And then now, for some reason, passing 70 years, I start to think of why I do things. I never thought, when I look at all the work that I've done, I said, what's behind this? Because we also have all this study, psychological study, why do people do things, And then I think I really needed this obsession to occupy space, and so sculpture was the best thing. I studied a bit of architecture, but with sculpture I could incorporate poetry, philosophy, politics, and everything in an object and conquer space.
So it's very interesting because when we spoke before, you mentioned your father who died when you were very young. I think you were 7 years old.
6, yeah.
6. And you said that in some way, possibly, your interest in sculpture, the fact that you're a sculptor, was perhaps connected. Your brother thinks that perhaps there was a connection there as well.
With my brother, no, actually my brother wasn't, he was painting a little bit, and he played the piano. That's my middle brother, the psychologist. My older brother was a graphic designer, and he left very early for California and worked in graphic design there. But no, he had his life and I had my life. It's different coming in from an upper middle class family. He was in school, he was involved in a lot of things. I was more in the street.
Right.
But in the street in the sense that I was making things, I did little jobs. I didn't have to for economical reasons, but I worked in construction. I created a small construction company because I like to make things.
So
I was the most physical
materiality
person.
of things
Excuse me?
was the materiality of
Yes,
things
yes,
was very
exactly.
important for
Materiality
you.
and physicality.
Yes.
Also, I played sports. I played hockey. I played football. I ran. I played baseball. And my brothers, they weren't interested in sports. And generally in that neighborhood, the parents were teaching children to get the best marks, to do the SAT scores to get to the best schools. And I was something weird in this neighborhood because I was, into these physical things. But that comes from an influence from the Italian side of my family.
Well, that's what I want to ask
Yeah.
you next about, which is identity.
Yes.
So we've talked about the materiality of the fact that you wanted to be a sculptor, that you wanted to occupy space. What I'd like to know now, because your identity is extremely vast in the sense that you had a Lebanese father, an Italian mother, you grew up in New York, in fact you were born.
In Boston.
Sorry, in Boston.
Yeah.
You grew in the States, and then you had this desire to return basically to your roots, to your father's roots. So what is your identity now?
Well, I would, like to think about Americans are all, not all of them immigrants, and some Americans want to forget the past of the countries they came from. I want to give you a little anecdote. Well, every Saturday and Sunday, our family, we lived in Boston, we go to Framingham, Massachusetts, where the two families live, the Italians and the Lebanese. And we'd have lunch in one, we'd have dinner in the other one. In the Italian family, I was very young, and my grandma was an incredible cook, and they would eat in this enormous kitchen. And after lunch, they would start talking, the sisters and the grandmother, in Italian dialect, which is called pranzang, which is an Italian with a French influence. I was very tiny. I drive them crazy. I was trying to talk to them, and I learned to talk this dialect. Now I've forgotten it. And then in the afternoon, we go to the Lebanese family. The Italian family are people, humble people from the mountains in the province of Parma that work carving stone. All the men and all the women in this tiny town were famous sewers. Okay, and then we go to the afternoon to my Lebanese family, which come from a different level of society, aristocratic Greek Orthodox family, where my grandfather, my grandmother's father, was called the Pacha of the Bekaa Valley. He controlled 1/3 of Lebanon, the Bekaa Valley in Greek Orthodox, and they were persecuted by the Ottoman Empire. They were killing off our family. And so my grandfather and grandmother, they came to the United States to escape from the tyranny of the Ottoman Empire. Okay? Okay, a tiny little story. Okay, I'm in the house in the afternoon, a typical situation. I'm in my grandparents, Lebanese grandparents' house. In the dining room, where there was this big long table, and at the end of the table there was this seat where my grandfather always would sit. He when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, he picked me up and put me on the table and started telling me the history of Lebanon and the Phoenicians, for example. And my grandmother would say, "Lies, Yusuf, lies, Yusuf. Why, Joseph, are you putting this in his head? We're in America. We've escaped from all this tyranny in the old country. Let him be American." But it's stuck in my head. And
What stuck in the head?
It's stuck in my head.
Phoenicia or America?
No, everything. But the Phoenician, and he said, "You're Phoenician, you're Arabic, and we have a great culture, and you should be proud of it." And then I got older, and I wasn't sitting on the table, I was sitting next to him, and he was talking to me about Middle Eastern politics and all kinds of things. And it was a part of my life. So I'm sorry for Situ, for my grandmother, Afiza Aziz, the daughter of the Pacha, the Bekapa. I can't help it. It was something that I always identified with, and I would study with books, etc. And then when I became an artist, I said, one day I have to deal with this in my work.
So, and this is what you've done. So now I'd like to move on to Morad and tell me how you met, because that's quite an extraordinary story as well.
Sure. We met both by chance and by some kind of, maybe you should say, objective chance, actually, or something that is close to chance but not exactly chance. I was actually doing research in Lebanon, which in itself is quite interesting because I guess I could have found any trace or any archives of Douglas history and works potentially in another place than Lebanon. Mm-hmm. And I maybe visited Lebanon 3 times so far during my research for the recent years. So it happened that I was in Lebanon. And that's the first time that I came across Douglas' work in the archival form, in the form of an exhibition brochure from 1991, because it was your Palermo exhibition brochure, the one from the Fourth Punic War Palermo exhibition. The archives I was researching in was also the archive of a sculpture, which is another objective chance. His name is César Namour. He's quite of a renowned Lebanese sculptor, still alive. And it happens that in the museum where he gathered and collected some Lebanese sculptors and artists, where I didn't found a sculpture of Douglas. He didn't have a sculpture, but he just had this exhibition brochure in his archives. And I found it, I took a photo of it. Actually, on that photo, Douglas was standing in front of that red carpet here. Mm-hmm. That's another objective chance. And it just intrigued me. I mean, it was I became very curious basically because he was standing in front of that red carpet on that photo and he was not dressed normally. He was dressed in a kind of tunic, in a kind of Roman dress almost, with a white and black textile wrapped around him. And anyway, I took a photo of that. And I remember I even asked César Namour if he knows anything. He told me no, it's just an exhibition brochure in my archives. But to be honest, I don't have any information on this artist. And shortly after, I was invited by a French museum, the Jeu de Paume, to do a curator's blog for 1 or 2 months and to share my discoveries or my insights, from the Middle East and my different travels. And I did a post about that image. I simply posted the photo I took from that exhibition brochure with Douglas standing in front of the carpet. And I just added some caption, very small comment saying, look at that, extremely intriguing. What a curious personage, an artist, and name. Douglas Abdell. Mm. The name in itself was certainly for my primary curiosity, like how can even this name exist, or how can someone be actually called like that? Is it maybe a pseudonym, maybe, or maybe an artist kind of nickname, or then I later understood that it was not at all a pseudonym, but his real name. And I also commented upon his clothes. I said that his kind of tunic looks like a Kanye West dressing, because I remember Kanye West, before he went in his Jesus phase, he used to dress like very long shirts, coming over until the knees and looking like a kind of Roman tunic. He also did some fashion shows with hundreds of people dressed like this anyway. So it was a comment about hip-hop culture, while I still didn't know at that point how hip-hop culture was important for Douglas. And I posted that image, let's make it short, and apparently Douglas found it.
So,
can I explain how I found
Sure.
it?
Yes.
Sure.
My best friend Fulvio, he Googles my name. Mm-hmm. And he sends me images of my sculptures and incredible information. And one day he sent me that image. Okay? And I read it and I said, I've got to communicate with this man. Please try to find his email, investigate him. He got his email, and then we started a communication by emails. I started sending him a little bit at a time, images, videos of my exhibitions, etc., articles, catalogs, poco, a little bit at a time, and we developed this friendship. Okay, now it gets back to you.
But there's a friendship, but so far you haven't even met each other. You're just emailing.
No,
At that point, we were just
Yeah.
emailing.
Yeah.
At that point,
Yes.
we were just emailing. I think because I was still working for the Tate at that point, so I was busy in London. All my travels were directed or orientated by Tate objectives and strategy and different kinds of professional duty. So it actually took me a year and a half, I think, before I made that step to say, okay, I have to travel to Malaga. I mean, Douglas is not in Malaga, but half an hour car from Malaga in the Pueblo. And yeah, it took me 1 year and a half. So for 1 year and a half, we keep writing emails, a few phone calls. He would send me all of these archives of his work. So at that point, I was almost sure that he's real. Almost sure.
And that the name was genuine.
I was still thinking maybe it's someone who plays a role and writes these emails, but no. Of course, after a few months correspondence, I was already convinced he's real. But then there was another question for me about the existing works,
Yes.
because of course I'm a curator. So even if human feelings and friendship is the first thing, I'm still obsessed with where are the works? Like, do the works exist? And that, even if Douglas was, because he was not literally sending me photos of the studio, he was more sending me photos of his catalogs and archives. But I definitely had to go to Malaga after 1 year and a half, and there it was incredible. I mean, Douglas took me at the airport. So he was there. I mean, he was in flesh at the airport waiting for me, and we took the car, and I think we immediately drove to the studio. His studio is quite of a dark and remote place. So, and there, when he opened the door of the studio, I saw what you saw in the film, which is this incredible landscape of stoneworks, surrounding you, almost in an archaeological room or archaeological museum. And then the picture was complete. I was with Douglas in flesh, all the works in front of me in the studio. And obviously I immediately got this desire to do what we have here. But it took another 3 years because of all our rush in life and busy and dizzy and counter energies back to back, and also the COVID happening made it a slow process.
Yes.
But we managed to do to shoot the film before the COVID.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh. So, go on. Did you want to say something?
No. It was, no, I didn't really, I think Morad said everything, but it was a wonder. No, I feel, as an artist, what do we really want to do? We want to exhibit our work. We want people to understand what we're doing. And I was just so involved, but I've been through the gallery system for years. I have to look at my curriculum, whatever. And I was in this period where I was just producing works. I wasn't interested so much. I had a project in the south of Spain which was called The Return of the Phoenician. It was like also semi-political. I assembled different works from my Phoenician periods, and I created this concept, The Return of the Phoenician. It was like the Reconquista of Andalusia, to reconquer Andalusia, South Spain, which has a tremendous Phoenician history. And I did several museum shows through there with that. But getting into the other world, what we're around right now, it was, I've been through that. I live in New York. I'm more of a New York artist than anything. I come from that whole world. I wasn't, involved in it. I was just doing my work. I sell my work once in a while, whatever. But, and then this was a connection to the real world.
Yes.
Your world. That other real world. It's all real world, no?
So you were in the world of your sculpture, of your work, of your studio. And then in comes Morad.
Yeah.
And
He
reconnects
started to
you.
take me out again.
Out again.
Take me out from the black spaces, from the black holes, where I'm working there. I'm producing the black holes. But he came there and he liked it, and let's rock, bro. Let's dance. Let's do something, And I wasn't just doing this exhibit. He published, PDFs about my work. He wrote about my work. He did things in the social media, etc., getting out. And he was committed with his group with my work, and that was grateful. I liked it. I liked, you know, working with them. I'm so happy.
Morad, tell us a bit about how you conceived curating this exhibition. And Douglas, if you need to interject or explain something.
Yeah.
So
No,
I want to hear from both of you.
Sure, I'll make it brief on my side for the curatorial project. I mean, thanks also to Salman and AB-ANBAR Gallery for providing this very beautiful space and the whole infrastructure. It was all depending on the amount of space. So as soon as we were clear about what amount and volume of space available we have, we could decide how many periods of work and how many of Douglas kind of categories, because his work kind of function quite in a categoric manner, so to speak, you know, in terms of shifting from a genre or from a style to another, almost decade after decade, or not exactly decade after decade, but, you know, working through the acadic and more massive and black shapes and sculptures in the 70s, beginning 80s. Then during the 80s, making his work more relational to the whole urban environment and street art or graffiti or general New York cosmopolitanism in a more neo-expressionist way. In between those, he invented one of his famous theories, the intervalist art and structures, which goes with an intervalist manifesto, which is fascinating, which is his attempt to grasp a lot of different esoteric and numerologic codes and symbols all together. There's often, I feel, in Douglas' works, the idea of grasping a huge amount of symbols and codes and reference within the same space, which could be a work on paper or a large sculpture or a work on canvas or a tapestry, but there is always a density, almost in a sense a cacophony of signs and symbols to be integrated or digested or translated within one space, again, within one artwork. That's one of the red threads that go through all his different genres and styles. And then, of course, through the 90s, the Phoenician and kind of neo-archaeologies that he creates through all the stoneworks. Depending on the amount of space, when it was clear for us, we decided to go through 3 different periods. I mean, broadly speaking, the acadic that you have in the room over here, the New York and neo-expressionist works over there, and the Phoenician and archaeological work in that room here. Mm-hmm. So I approached it in a very pragmatic and simple and, you know, without making it too complex, you know, trying to show the most emblematic and most telling work for each of these period and try to display them, you know, in a legible way again, but still trying to show that density or that kind of that complexity of his work. But in the most simple way, I hope, and without adding complexity to the complexity that already exists in the work.
And Douglas, how did you feel about all of this? Because here you have somebody else curating your work.
Yeah, no, it was a wonderful experience because at the end of the day, it's a collaboration. Let's go back to, I mean, Morad had a lot of information. He visited me a few times. The first time then to make the documentary, then he came with Salman and his crew down there. And it was like a really intense period. They're in my studios. And we're looking at all these works because there's other periods also. Yes. He mentioned intervalism. There's a whole group of intervalist work. Intervalism also filters into these works. But let's forget intervalism. Sorry to bring it up. But in any case, we're looking at a lot of works, and everyone had different ideas, and one pulling to this, Salman liked this, Morad wanted that, and then I had to like edit this. But it's a collaboration. And then in the end, we got to a group of works, and a group of works for the exhibit. Okay, Zamân and his crew left. The last 3 days, Morad stayed with me. And we go to the studio, and it was an incredible experience for me because we're sitting at a small table in my studio, and I brought some paper. I just wasn't even thought of for what it was. And I had this ruler and some pencils, an eraser, and a sharpener, and Morad was sitting in front of me there, and we knew the works. And then he started to draw out the spaces in the gallery, and he started to put the works, you know, the information of the works. He designed the exhibit in about an hour, 2 hours. It was incredible. I've never seen anything like that. I mean, I do exhibits. When I did the Return of the Phoenician, lots of times I go with Fulvio, my friend, and we were there for the installation, we're telling people move things around. Other times, the works arrive and the curators do all the installation, which I like also. I didn't even say surprise me. I thought, that's a nice interpretation. But this guy, I mean, his concentration, and then it all came alive. They only changed one thing. In the end of the exhibit, this is something, there's a work on the end on the right, a collage work from the street called Ramito Trabaja, which is breaking the word trabajo, which means work. Anyway, I wanted that piece in the exhibit because that's real New York downtown street, which resonates on the South Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, all real street activity with posters, Chinese posters from the sweatshop Chinese, a Latin posters in the hip hop posters, everything there. I wanted that so much in the exhibit. And they had 2 other works. And then we negotiated that in the last few days before, and he took out the works and he put that one in there. So now it's like 100%. No, that's fun.
It's interesting because when a curator looks at your work and puts it together in a way that he's conceived it, do you see different things in it? I mean, do you rediscover
how they
aspects?
Look at it? Yeah, sometimes, that's a wonderful thing because I make the works and then it's like an interpretation. That's what I love. And I love when people write about my work and you come up with things. You're going to say things that maybe I didn't even think about. I can talk to them blue in the face, but but I prefer I love the interpretation. People interpret things, because I can talk till the cows come home, and I can associate in whatever. Better I close and listen to you people and have fun with it, enjoy it, and interpret and install it.
And Morad, I mean, you're a curator, so I'm not perhaps as surprised as Douglas is by you just conceiving the exhibition in sort of one go. But now you see it actually physically out. Is it what you planned, expected? Were there surprises?
I don't know. For me, it's because at the end of the day, we've discussed and looked at this as these different works. As I said, Douglas Studio is a small and remote place where the works are a bit accumulated. There is a certain charm about it because it looks, as I said, like an archaeological storage, maybe more than a museum. But at the same time, you can feel that the works need to breathe somehow. And they need what we call the white cube, or what tends to survive in our, let's say, postmodern culture as the white cube, right? So I had mixed feelings because I didn't want the work to look maybe, too new or too as if they. I mean, to put them in the white cube is also to break them from their context in a way, or from that kind of mysterious garden in which they were kept for so long. So from the one hand, I have this tremendous emotion and fascination to see them coming out of there and being on the spotlight and in that kind of blank page that give them a resonance to the world. At the same time, I was a bit maybe anguished that it shouldn't look too, I don't know, too white or too empty. So that's why I still wanted to have this density to recreate what you feel when you go in his studio, even if you have to make it look like cleaner and, you know, more perfect or more museological, you know. So I guess finding the balance between this thirst and impulse for density, complexity, accumulation, and on the other hand, making it legible to everyone and kind of graspable for any viewer. I mean, even, of course, including people who never heard about him, because I don't know, did you ever exhibit it in London or?
No, maybe
No.
in a group. No, I don't remember.
Yeah, it might be the first solo show,
So
let's
this
say.
is the
first solo
this
show
is
for
definitely-
London,
This must be
so-
the first
Full
solo
show.
show.
So
in
these
London.
were my
Show.
feelings anyway.
Yes.
I have this
Yeah, yeah.
schizophrenia of coming out of the archaeological storage and coming in the museological white cube and find the balance between them
Yeah,
somehow. But
it's interesting.
I guess a lot of Douglas' work, like the MA for Aguas, on these very massive and strong wooden kind of tables or raft, contribute anyway, per se, I mean, by themselves, to give something more than just a museum show, I guess, than playing with what should go on pedestal, what should not go on pedestal. To make it very practical, question was also a concern.
I would like to put something
Sure.
in here. Here, actually, we're talking about 3 periods of my work. Actually, 3.5 periods of my work. The M equals agua, M equals water. There's a web page, www.abdellmagua.com, and you can enter it and see that whole group. Here, this is here, behind everyone there with a suitcase, and here's another M agua. But I wanted to say that, you know, when the other works on stone, these were done in Madrid. They were done, my first studio in Madrid was a sótano. It was like in an apartment building, I had the basement. And then I moved, I got an incredible studio with a patio and everything, and I continued making bigger ones. And then later I made these work. And this was like, what's this thing? I was like, look, like I said, I was traveling through the Mediterranean this is coming out of New York, studying Phoenician ruins, and had a big biblos, a big library of images, and I was recreating Phoenician sculptures over 2,000 years later. And I actually became a Phoenician sculptor 2,000 years later. No, it was a wonderful experience. But then also the existential basis, which is very important. I wanted to acknowledge where I was. Also, the Phoenician is here in 2019 in Madrid, 2018, and what's he doing? In my neighborhood, this old, kind of the Castizo, old neighborhood where they have the corrales, these old buildings with lots of apartments in them, and they had to change the structure of the apartments. Sometimes I have the Spanish coming in and out of my mind. The laws of construction there said you've got to get the wooden beams out of these buildings and put steel beams. And so they're filling containers with this wooden beams.
The wood
Containers. And I would go there and take my cart, and I'd taken it back to my studio. Okay, and then I have all this Phoenicianism and the agua concept on top of them. I don't consider them bases, they're part of it. But it's also an existential I want to give credit to where I am. The Phoenician was here now. I don't know where I'm going to be tomorrow. And of
So
course,
this
I'm
is
in Malaga.
linking you.
It's
So
part of it.
This is
Yeah,
all
yeah.
part of a continuous process, of a
Exactamente,
continuum.
but I signed the work, like in some of these sculptures, I signed the stone pieces, I signed Abdell, Lebanon. And I made them in Madrid because my mind and heart was in Lebanon.
So your mind is,
yeah,
yes.
that's different than this. But I wanted, the agua was, the wood is from Madrid, and you know, it's from where I was living, you know? And obviously I was attracted to that material, but it was just to date it, and give it an existential reality as part of the base of the sculpture. Okay.
I'm going to open up to questions in a minute, but I've just got 2 last questions to ask you, Douglas. One is about the totems.
The totems.
To go right
Okay.
back to the New York period.
Okay, let's get back to New York
Let's
City.
get back to New York City.
I'm ready to go.
What was going through your mind?
1980s. Okay, I had a loft on the corner of Broadway and Grand Street in Soho, very close to Chinatown, Little Italy, and of course Soho, which is an art colony, etc. Very close to my house, there were these factories, Chinese sweatshops, where they're coming in materials in crates like this size. Like if you look on the wall on the left, you see these are the crates that I took apart. They have the nails, which I left in them. If you put those together, you have a crate which is like this, okay? And these crates, they would be piled up in the street, right on my street. You know, the Chinese were working 24 hours a day, so it was horrible conditions there. But they're Hong Kong. They're coming from Hong Kong. They're coming to New York. They're filled with materials. I don't know what was in there. In the factory, they leave them out the street, and a big truck would come and take them away. And I get them, and I take them to my studio. The totems are those put on top of each other with screws, bolts, etc., and then I painted them. I did other ones that are not here that have some collage on them, but that's where that material. All that material in that room comes from the neighborhood. About less than 600-700 meters from my loft, I would find that material and drag it. The big, river work, ramito, armament work, all that material from that period was taken from the street, and that was the material that I worked on, the support.
Yeah. So I also wanted, and this is my last question, and then we'll go over to your questions. There is a big sculpture.
An ACAD.
Yes, an ACAD.
Yes, an ACAD.
Tell us a bit more about that.
Okay, the ACAD period, in that room, we start off with this painting was on the left, which were, after I graduated from university, I went to live in the mountains in Vermont and upper state New York for 6-7 years. And I was in art school and university, I was in the sculpture part, and they had a great bronze casting, a foundry there. And I realized when last year's in university, I was saying, what am I going to do? I was actually offered a job as the head of a sculpture department because the director of the sculpture department loved my work, and they came up from Arkansas where he studied. They were looking for a director of the sculpture department in Arkansas. They were offering me a good salary, a house to live in, all the bronze that I wanted to cast, which I was addicted to casting bronze at the time. And I had to teach some advanced sculpture students. But then I didn't accept it because I would have a salary, I would have been able to eat and everything and have material. But my personality, I would worry so much about the student. I would get into their heads and their personal problems, and I just wanted to be an artist. So I said, what's the other thing? What's the other possibility? I go to Babylon. I go to New York and look for a gallery to sell my work. So actually, when I was still a student, I was talking to galleries, negotiating. I negotiated my first exhibit at the Graham Gallery when I was still a student. Okay, and so the EAD period, which is nothing, there's no EADs here. They're very complicated cast bronze sculptures that I made in my first period, which was in Arkville, New York, as a hermit. The last few months, I built the machines to make the sand molds. I prepared for going into my hermitage. And I went up there and I made those works. And then afterwards, I moved to South Stratford, Vermont after 3 years, and I was doing the CREADs. And I would take them down to New York City. And, these works I take down. I think I mentioned something in the video. No, it was a poetic period because we were talking about when I was making the EADs. I mentioned in the video.
the large ACAD we have
you
here
asked me about the ACAD.
I did.
Oh, okay, I'm
I
sorry.
did.
quite
Yeah.
similar to those you showed in Park Avenue, 79.
Yeah, exactly.
That we saw in the film.
This is the last period of ACADs, because the last period are more vertical and more simplified more vertical than horizontal, and less movement and more. Actually, they were inspired by buildings in New York City, not a particular building. No, but it was just, I wanted to express this, and I did these exhibits, I did them in Germany, etc. And that was like the end of the ACAD for a moment. And now recently, in 2018, I got back into the ACADs. Now we have a whole new generation of ACADs, and they're coming, and they're going to come strong now. Okay, yeah, and that was the last period of ACADs. Okay.
I think that's right. So we have something to look forward to. I'm going to pass over to the floor. If you've got any questions, put your hands up. I'm sure
Yes.
you.
Well, so maybe to pick up on the ACADs, can you please maybe talk a little bit about your experience of showing in such an extraordinary spot like Park Avenue?
You want to know how that happened?
How did it happen, and how did it feel to see your work?
Okay, I'll explain to that. I had this exhibit planned on a gallery at 41 East 57th Street, 2 floors for a big exhibit. I had like 68 cats ready to go. And like 3 or 4 months before the opening of the gallery, these pieces are on Park Avenue. They were supposed to be in the gallery. And then the building said, they tried to get permission. The building said they were too heavy for the floors. A little bit like this. Anyway, and so I had to look for something. I just happened to have a very powerful family buying my works, the Rosenthal family, part of the Annenberg Foundation, whatever. And the director of the gallery said, Douglas wanted to exhibit his works in the gallery, but now he can't. And these people moved with a high level of politics in New York City. And they were very friends with A. who was the ex-mayor. And the woman said, tell Douglas to look around the neighborhood and find a place for his sculptures. So I went up Park Avenue. I saw these islands. It's like the Castellano, but smaller, whatever. These islands, they were perfect for my sculptures. And I said I want 74th to 75th Street because there was a certain amount of greenness there and there weren't too many bushes and I could fit my sculptures. And so this person spoke to A. who was working in Washington, and he talked to the Parks Department in New York. I said, can we do this? They said, okay, you can do it. So what happened was, and then the Parks Department got in touch with me. You can put them in there, but you can't use a crane because it makes a lot of noise, and you have to do it Saturday night, this day. He gave me the date, Saturday night, and they have to be installed by 7 o'clock before the sun rises, okay? It was very interesting. So it was like, there's a film, Heavy Metal on Park Avenue. You can check it out in the YouTube. At that time, my girlfriend was a filmmaker at MIT, and she was doing cinema verite. She made a film of the whole experience of taking these 3 sculptures down a big tractor trailer. It was like the Trojan horse, no? And we came down at night, and we had to install them without a crane.
Yeah, how
so
did
we
you
had
do that?
wood
How did you do
with
that?
steel bars. You put one piece of wood, and you thick, heavy wood, and you put the steel bars, and you push.
So like the Egyptians.
Just till we got to that. It's a funny, I think about it because, there are other things that happened by this. This was Saturday night. There's a peculiar thing of New Yorkers, they have, when they see something weird, not all New Yorkers, we're talking Upper East Side, these people from Upper East Side, they wake up Sunday morning and they saw these sculptures. They said, was I drunk last night? These weren't here. They start calling the New York Times. This is what I was told. The New York Times got so many calls, they sent the photographer down to make photos of it. And a writer, they looked information about me. They got some kind of biographical thing, and it appeared on the front page of the New York Times the next day, on Monday.
Amazing.
Incredible. And there was also kind of, things.
It's amazing because they look like they were conceived for, from the photos
For that,
I've seen,
there, yeah.
They absolutely look as though they were conceived for the spots that you
Yeah.
installed them in. How long were they there for?
They were there for 3 years. We had petitions. A lot of people in the neighborhood want them, but the park department said they can't stay. They were supposed to stay for a month. They stayed 3 years. And then finally, the park department, we negotiated that they made a park just for my work on Cherokee Terrace, John Jay Park, a few blocks away. And there's a park there where there's 2 of them.
And they're
There
still
were
there?
3 sculptures, but one of them, when they went to the park, I sold it to a museum in Wichita Art Museum. I said, but I have my own park designed, and there are 2 still there, and they're there. Yeah, because they said that we start letting you here have, and the people that plugged me in with that, the Rosenthal Foundation, they said, we're going to buy the 3 of them, donate them to the city, and maintain them in perpetuity. They were going to paint them whenever after they take them, but they couldn't do it. But, the reality of the story is you go up Park Avenue, get to Harlem in the 90s, and there was a big Louise Nevelson. But no problem. They were afraid there was going to be a whole invasion of young sculptors or whatever. But anyway, I'm fine. I'm good with it. Whatever. It is what it is.
It's a great story.
It will be what it will be.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
But there's a good number of other sculptures from Douglas who are still in American parks and playgrounds, and
Museum.
Fulvio helped to find photos of those, and it's fun actually. You could try, we should do it, to try to archive all of those which are still erected nowadays.
Well, the Wikipedia, because I looked before the talk, I looked at the Wikipedia entry,
Uh-huh.
and at the bottom you have a list of all of the locations.
Right.
So that would be a
Ah,
good
the public
starting
collection,
point.
et cetera, yeah.
Like Storm King, they're
Yeah.
mostly in regional museums across the US, but
Yes.
they're kind of everywhere.
But there are some also in Europe.
Yeah.
There were not a huge number. I mean, the majority are in the States, but
There's
there
one
are
in,
some.
in the, one of the ACATs of exactly this last period in the Quadrat Museum in Bottrop. The Joseph Albert Museum
Oh,
in
right.
Bottrop, they call it
Oh,
Quadrat
okay.
Museum there. And
Okay.
there are probably some other ones I don't remember, but there are many, many in the United States, all over the United States, in California, Kansas, all over there. Big size, some for the later period, mostly from the period of what was happening on Park Avenue, that period. I built a lot of them.
Vanessa, you had a question?
I just had one quick question. It was relating to music, which is obviously a big part of your practice.
My
With
relationship to
hip-hop,
music.
with rap, and how that kind of,
Well,
what the relationship
bueno,
work is.
the relationship with music goes back. I always listened to music. Oh, let's say when I was very young, the first music I listened was Bill Haley and Rock Around the Clock, no? And then I was Presley, and then I get into soul music, etc. When I was living as a hermit, for example, I would listen. I didn't have a television, didn't have a radio, I didn't have a telephone for sure, and I would put on records, R&B records. I probably listened to more soul music, James Brown, than anything. And then when I always listen to music when I'm working, when I'm drawing, and then when I came to New York City, when I bought the loft, and I was showing there for years. But living in New York is different than exhibiting there. It's another, or living anywhere or exhibiting there. And I just happened to arrive when things like Mele Mele, Grandmaster Flash, The Message, Africa Mambata, hip-hop in general. What's hip-hop? Breakdancing, graffiti, and rap music. When that was just happening, it's coming out of the South Bronx, infiltrating Brooklyn, Manhattan, etc. I was listening. I love that music. I just happened to be there. And it was an interesting sociological situation in the art world because the art world in New York is upper middle class, upper class, a closed society, you know? And all of a sudden, graffiti entered into it. You have these people from the street that don't have these, they don't go to the big art schools, which is like, it's almost like a mafia situation there. And it opened it up. And a lot of people were listening to this music, and the graffiti artists were coming to the exhibits, and we were going to their exhibits and the music. Actually, I did a big party when I did my Intervalist theory. We had the first edition of the Intervalist magazine, and you know, we had a disc jockey rap and some break dancers, and no, it was fun. No, it's just fun. It's not. You know, and I connected with the graffiti people because of the music and everything. But up until I went to live there, I had nothing to do with, I didn't know about graffiti. I knew about it, but I didn't realize because it actually exploded with the music. It's like, for example, when I got to New York, my sculptures on Park Avenue were already there. And I started meeting graffiti artists and openings, et cetera. And a lot of them told me they really loved my sculptures because, you know, part of the work is based on letter structure. And it was like something that didn't exist, sculptures in graffiti. And these weren't graffiti, they had nothing to do, well, they weren't thought of as, but they're letter structures. So I immediately had this relationship with them, which was great. There was a mutual respect, and I liked the way they write the tags, more than anything, the tags, because they're structures, and they're, you know, they have tremendous
And the
energy.
letters. And the letters, which you're
And-
very interested
Oh,
in
yeah,
as
of
well.
course, the letter.
Yeah.
But also, nowadays, okay, let's get my son, his name is Anibal like Hannibal, about 2018, 19, I don't remember exactly the year. He does trap, rap, and drill music. Okay, he's 21 years old. And he said, Papa, come here. We're in South Spain, no? He said, listen to this, Bad and Boozy Migos, X Tentacion. He's playing me trap music. And there was a big interval when I was living as a hermit and even in Boston with the R&B music. Then I get into this whole Arabic music, Fairuz, with all this another type of music from the Gulf area, I was listening to, and then I wasn't listening to so much music, and he got me into the trap, and now when I'm doing ACADic drawings on the other side of this wall, I've got over 320 ACADic drawings, and ACAD sculpted, when I was doing the drawings for these works, I listened to this music. I mean, he got me hooked on it again. Also with the internet, I can go back and see, Boogie Down Production, KRS-One, Melly Mel, Rakim, all this stuff, and interviews with these guys, and I enjoy it when I'm listening to it. It's like entertainment for me. What does it directly have? Well, I don't know if there's any direct in it, but I love that stuff. In fact, this is the new literature. When I was living as a hermit, I was in university, I was reading the existentialists, Hegel, Heidelberg, etc., the German romanticists, Thomas Mann, Hermann Hesse, Novalis, the beat poet, so much heavy literature, Dostoevsky, Céline, Artaud, Rimbaud. And now what I like to, I don't read those things anymore. And somehow it gave me some, not inspiration, but it gave me mental food, intellectual food. And now what I find the realist reality that I can listen to and also I can feel in my body because it's music is rap and trap. Not all of it, because it's so real. And you imagine you're listening to street poetry, a language, and the way they transform words, and it's almost like a dialect that has a beat on it, and it's like, it's entertainment on a high level, a spiritual level, or etc. Okay.
Question? Okay, well, thank you so much. I hope that you've enjoyed. I hope that this has helped you understand the exhibition better. And our great thanks go to you for coming.
Thank you.
And to Morad for...
Thank you, Georgina.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Bye-bye.